So let's start with that video. I know you couldn't see it, but it was talking a bit about games and you using games to train AI and why that's so important and useful. Could you tell us a bit about that? Why is it?
Games and AI have a long history together. In fact, games, when AI started as a field in the 1940s and 50s, one of the big challenges from the beginning was could you program an AI system to play chess? And I think one of the reasons games has been so closely involved with AI is that it's kind of games are a microcosm of life. So, and we've invented them to be challenging and interesting and fun for humans to play. So, they're great challenges really for AI systems to be developed on. And if you pick enough games and you try and get a system to be general across all of those games, then you're on the beginnings of the way to having general algorithms that could apply to things outside of games.
So, and that has obviously led to a lot of progress. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to jump right to the end and then come back. But Kate, you have written thought a lot about what this progress means and where it's taking us. And there's a lot, but what is it that excites you the most of everything that's happening that people like Demis are doing?
I mean, I think we're at this pivotal moment. We have seen an extraordinary acceleration just in the last 3 years. So I think what's exciting about that is what are the new scientific challenges that we can address? But at the same time, we're seeing the creation of an enormous planetary infrastructure that is by far and away the most capital-intensive thing that we have ever built as a species. And it's drawing more energy, more water, and more minerals than anything we've built. So we are also facing, in addition to this sort of exciting time around scientific innovation, I think a very real environmental and social and political challenge at the same time. So for me, I see addressing those problems as just as important as addressing a new algorithm or a new data infrastructure.
And Glenn, you are sort of in a world where a lot of these changes are going to have massive impact, and you're thinking about it, how to bring it to the rest of us as it applies to industry. What is it that you're thinking about? What is it that, when you look at all the progress, and there's news almost every other day, what is it that you're thinking about with your business, how this applies to you and how it affects your customers?
Yeah, no, and I think what Kate was just saying, that's one of the things that comes to my mind all the time, because we are in this Cambrian explosion of new things coming in all different ways, and we recognize the need to use these things for good, and how in our business, travel distribution, hundreds of millions of customers, millions of partners that we deal with. How can we use these things to optimize, to make things better for everybody to experience this world? That's our motive. But at the same time, using it can cause problems. And whether it be things that Kate just mentioned or things even as simple as employment. So as we develop these things, as we use these things, and I see the efficiency. Well, efficiency is an interesting word to use when you're starting to let people go because you don't need the human now. I can use an algorithm instead, which is good for shareholders, and it could be overall the macroeconomic thing. It's more efficiency for the whole world, but there's the individual who's hurt by it. And how are we going to deal with these things?
Talking about efficiencies and what's going on, one of the things that often comes up now is AGI, and when it is going to come, artificial general intelligence. First of all, what is it, according to you, and when do you think it might arrive?
Well, actually, my colleague Shane Legg, my co-founder of DeepMind and our chief scientist, he helped to define that term way back in the dark ages of 2000, I think it was, 2001. And we've always thought about it as a system that can exhibit all the cognitive capabilities humans can. And the reason that the human mind is an important reference point, of course, is that as far as we know, the human brain is the only example we have in the universe of a general intelligence, a fully general intelligence. And so if one can exhibit all the capabilities from creativity to reasoning, all of these high-level capabilities that we're capable of, then in theory, you may have a fully general system. And so that's really the definition of the bar for me of what AGI is. And progress has been incredibly rapid, as we all know, and is increasingly speeding up. And I think maybe there's a 50% chance of it being in the next 5 to 10 years.
As soon as that. Mm-hmm. Kate, do you have a view on this? What is it? Because we had a conversation about this earlier, and it was interesting.
Well, let's say controversial opinion. I think AGI is a distraction. I think we're using this term, in fact, Dario Amodei, who's the CEO of Anthropic, I think put it really well. It's become a marketing term. There is no benchmark for when we reach AGI. So it's whenever somebody tells us that, oh, this system is exceeding a whole range of human tasks, but those tasks have not yet been defined. And what's really interesting is that if you said, well, what about when an AI system can do better than 200 Nobel laureates? Well, we passed that 70 years ago when you ask somebody to do long division in their head. We had computational systems that could do that much faster. So it really depends on where you set that measuring line. I also think it's a trap in that we are acting like there is a finish line and then everything stops. Oh, we've reached AGI. Frankly, we should be thinking about a different question, which is, are we creating AI systems that are actually benefiting everyone, that are increasing forms of social agency and equality, that are actually addressing core problems like climate change and the collapse of democratic institutions, just a few of those, That'd be great. So this is what I would love us to be asking. When do we build AI that's actually good for everyone?
Can I just interject there? I don't think it's an either-or, right? So, there's a scientific advance to try and get to AGI. I do think that is testable. You could imagine 10,000 different tasks, or maybe 100,000 even, that cognitive tasks that psychologists and others have developed. And it's about consistency as well. Although in some, of course, it can do long division better than humans can. You don't need AI for that, just the calculator will do. But you need to be consistent. Yeah, sometimes it can't count the number of R's in a word, right? So that to me shows we're nowhere near yet AGI, because you have to have a general level of consistency. That's what the general in AGI means. That's why that term was coined versus just AI. It's the generality that's key, and that what makes the human mind so special. And in my view, we're still nowhere near that. But at the same time, of course, we should be thinking about how those systems can be built and used in extremely beneficial ways for society. That both, I think, are important objectives to think about.
I completely agree with you, but I think if you look at what the focus has been of the industry, it has been AGI, it hasn't been sustainable computing that isn't using as much energy as the nation of Japan, which is what we currently have. We aren't seeing systems that are being assessed on how they affect wealth inequality or how they're actually improving educational health outcomes. For me, these are real benchmarks rather than, can it perform a series of mathematical functions? So it's almost broadening out. What are the goals we're really aiming for here? And how can we realign with the priorities that are genuinely good for people and the planet?
So jumping off from there, Glenn, one of the things that is quite relevant to a business such as yours is AI agents and how they'll be deployed. And one of the questions there is, of course, building trust between the customer and the system. How do you think about that?
No, we think about it all the time, because one of the few things a company has is a brand value, is trust. Do you believe that partner, that customer, do you believe that we together can create something that is lasting and we're not trying to cheat you? Fairness is a big issue, and that comes a lot up into all these new AI systems, of whether or not, is it fair or not? Is it fair, for example, that I can use these systems to be able to better optimize pricing, that I'm going to charge one price to one group and a different price to another group, and I'm going to actually maximize the value to myself? And now people feel that's unfair. And it's a question of what is the article, of what is fairness or not. The interesting thing is we have governments, and these governments, that's kind of their job, is to come up with what are the rules? How are we supposed to play in this new world going forward? In democracies, the idea is that we elect the people to create these rules. Part of the problem, of course, is they don't really understand the issues at all, which makes it very hard. You two have to kind of explain it to them to figure it out, and it takes a long time. Meanwhile, all these technological changes are going so fast down the road, it's far beyond. I mean, the EU came up with their AI Act to try and well, they put that together at the beginning before there was such a thing as generative AI. And then in the middle, they're trying to figure, okay, how are we going to fit this, shoehorn this in? It's very difficult because we have people who are creating great things going forward, and at the same time, we have the people who make the rules are far behind. And I feel that is an issue. And I don't know a solution, but I do know it's an issue.
What do you think about what the solution may be, Kate?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing, if you look at the last decade, there's been an enormous emphasis on regulation. In fact, Demis and I were just chatting about this backstage, that we really need national and international coordination. And what have we seen in the last 12 months? A real collapse of an international vision. The AI summit that we both attended really didn't have that vision of creating a shared agenda or a way to address real risk. We're starting to see, in fact, almost a retreat towards a kind of a national vision of build your own empire as fast as you can and don't think about everybody else. And I think that's really dangerous. So we have to really find a way to create new institutions of governance, because as we're seeing right now in the United States, we have lost the few guardrails that we had on AI. They've all been erased in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. So we need to think about what are more rigorous, what are more durable, and what are more international visions that aren't, at the beck and call of a single world leader.
And it's very difficult because we, as a very global company, we operate in over 200 places around countries and territories around the world, and everybody sets up their own rules, their own guidelines. Extremely difficult for any international company to try and deal with all these variations. I mean, can you imagine in the airline business, can you imagine every single airport had a different idea how they're going to identify their runways, right? Fortunately, there is an international rule, and every single runway around the world is identified the same way, so every pilot knows what it means. 44 arm, they know what it means. But we're ending up with an AI system that the rules are all over the place. Very, very difficult.
What do you make of the debate between AI safety and progress? Do you even see it as a debate?
Of course. We've been advocating for AI safety research and thoughtful, using the scientific method to make progress, try and understand these systems as best you can before you deploy them, from the very beginning of the founding of DeepMind back in 2010 and before that. The issue is that one of the problems that, and I agree with Glenn on that, the government and trying to get government up to speed with where the technology is going, is the technology itself is developing still so quickly. It's not in a static state like airplanes or flight where you get a decade or more of stability, and then governments can get their head around it and then make some good long-lasting rules. I think the problem you have is that 5 years ago, if you tried to make some regulation about AI, it would have been on a totally different thing to what today's generative AI is.
Which in Brussels they
and
did
then
try.
in another 5 years, it may be different again
Totally
as we
different
go
again.
back into the agentic era. New techniques like reinforcement learning become more important and back into vogue. So the problem is the science itself is very highly changing. But that doesn't mean we can't do anything. We should be thinking very carefully and investing more, I think, as an industry and as an academic field into interpretability, understanding what guardrails can we put on these things, and how we can make sure as they get more powerful, we can still sort of guide them and ensure that they do what's beneficial for the human designers and society has decided we should use these systems for. Which of course, that's why I spent my whole career on working on AI, because I believe it will be one of the most beneficial tools ever invented for accelerating things like science and medicine, which is what I've always tried to use AI for.
So just staying with you, Demis, for a second about what AI can do. You won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, and you've said that AI is going to solve all the outstanding scientific problems ahead of us, like in time. What's the next big challenge that you think AI is going to help us crack?
Well, with AlphaFold and protein folding, which I think was part of the video, the intro video, that was like a 50-year grand challenge in biology. Sometimes some of my friends in biology used to call it kind of the equivalent of Fermat's last theorem in biology. And it accelerates everything in biology and medical research, because if you want to do drug discovery or something like that, you need to know the structure of the protein so you can design a drug to target the right part of the protein. So it's a sort of I call it like a root node problem. And it opens up all these new avenues of research. And, over 2 million researchers around the world now make use of AlphaFold in their incredibly important research. So I think that's just a taste of what's to come. And I focus on that because I wanted to prove what could AI do that would be sort of unequivocally beneficial for society and the research community. And I think AlphaFold is a good example of that. But I hope in 10 years' time we'll look back and we won't be just this isolated success breakthrough. It will actually be the beginning, the herald of almost a new renaissance or a new golden era of discovery, with AI helping the best scientists in the world and experts in the world make progress and breakthroughs much more quickly, including things like curing diseases and also helping with stuff like climate change, finding new materials, accelerating new technologies like fusion. I think AI has a big part to play in that and making the world a much better place over the next 10 to 15 years.
Kate, in terms of these changes that we'll all have to live with, you've talked about regulation, government, society at large. What about the rest of us who are not in government, who are not demists? What do we have to think about as these changes come down the pipe?
I think we're facing a really important moment, which is, do we want to make AI a public issue, an issue that we are going to care about because it is affecting our jobs, our education, our futures, the habitability of our planet? Right now, I completely agree with Demis. I would love to see AI being used for scientific discovery, for work in medical research, but we've just seen it slashed by 50% here in the United States and the absolute gutting of the NIH. At the same time, we're seeing AI be used to track and detain immigrants. We just saw ICE sign a $30 million deal with Palantir to create the first massive conjoined surveillance platform that affects, everybody who's immigrated to this country. And we're also seeing it used to fire people en masse through Doge. So that's the use of AI right now. And we're seeing the reduction of scientific investment in the real challenges, in how do we actually come up with better drug discovery? How do we address climate change? So for us, we have to decide, is this the kind of AI future that we want? And if not, this is the time to start making noise together and say, we need a more equitable vision.
Yeah, I'm smiling. I'm smiling because I'm in between Kate and Dennis, and I have Kate with like the evil, the terrible things that can happen. I got Dennis, the world's going to be fantastic. It's going to be incredibly great. And it's interesting because technology has always been this way. Technology has always been both good. It's how we use it. The first Stone Age guy with a club, he could have used it if he'd go out and get some food. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hit some food, or he could go over and hit some guy to take his wife. And that's all technology throughout history. And we are at a stage now, which unfortunately, though, this technology has the ramifications so much greater, even up to things when we think about fusion and things of nature could be used for good or bad. And I, as a businessman, I just try and use it for the good, of course, but I recognize used incorrectly or poorly could be disastrous for our species.
You wanted to add something? Yeah, I mean, look, of course, Glenn's right, and this is what we've known, Kate and I have known from the beginning, is that all transformative technologies can be used for good or bad. It depends how we deploy them and what we prioritize as society. And actually, just going back to your question of what everyone can do, I do think as these systems become deployed in more everyday products, assistants, these kinds of things, I think everyone can exercise their choice as a consumer to actually use the sort of capitalist reward function of use services from companies or organizations that you think are being responsible about the deployment of AI and using it in beneficial ways. You can all do that, and that is a form of sort of voting with your wallet in a way of like influencing and rewarding maybe companies, organizations that are trying to be more responsible, maybe deploy things a bit slower and make sure they're more robust, things like that. I think that is going to come into the equation in the next 5 years as these systems come out of the lab and into the real world products.
Unfortunately, in the economies that we live in, market economies, where the incentives are unfortunately tilted much more towards making progress on the bottom line than society. The externalities are usually not incorporated into the P&L. So we even see, if you go back to some of the companies that, move fast and break things was an idea, was a motto for a company. That may have been okay back then, but now that we're playing with much more dangerous things, it may not be the best way to go forward.
As I said, I think it's definitely, I've said many times, I think the move fast and break things mantra, although it's created a lot of progress, lots of interesting products, but I think for very transformative technologies like AI, I don't think it's the right approach. And we need something a lot more thoughtful, like using the scientific method, to make progress from here, in my opinion.
But if I'm really honest, I mean, if you look at the AI companies that we have today, the techniques they're using are remarkably similar. Actually, we don't have a lot of differentiation in terms of which company has the most sustainable AI, which company is actually making sure that their AI systems aren't being used for policing foreign students, for example. Like, we aren't being given those sorts of choices, and they're the sorts of choices that we urgently need.
So we only have a few minutes, and I was about to ask you something along those lines. So just throwing this forward, what is next in this world that we don't know about yet, haven't written about yet, talked about yet, that you are keeping an eye on that is interesting and exciting?
Well, I think we are seeing the end of the Vannevar-Bush Accords. That was really the vision that government, industry, and of course the university sector would work together to create the most extraordinary technical innovations. And we've been benefiting from that for 70 plus years. We're seeing a really sharp halt and a retreat from thinking about publicly funded science and publicly funded goals that are democratic in origin. So I think we have to ask some really hard questions right now about what happens when we start to see a retreat from scientific discovery. All of the companies that are sort of here as part of this event have benefited from public research, and now that is being gutted. So we have to start to think about what can happen now for us as a society to reach those goals that we care about if it's not going to be coming from the top down. For me, I think that means it has to come from the bottom up. It means that we actually have to start thinking at a community level, at state levels, and internationally, how we're going to protect growing a base of knowledge and science at a time when we're really starting to see it under attack.
Demis, same question. What's next that we haven't quite acknowledged yet?
I think, I alluded to this earlier. I'm very excited over the next decade of more scientific advances being enabled and facilitated by AI. I do think there are huge challenges in the world. Obviously, AI is one of them, but there are many others: climate, disease, these things, where I would be much more worried about them if I didn't know that a revolutionary technology like AI was coming along down the road to potentially help with those other challenges. So I think that's big. But then I also agree, with Kate that we need to figure out how we're going to get international cooperation around these types of technologies that, even things like regulation, it's sort of not really much use if it's only one small part of the world regulating in a certain way, because these technologies are international, they're digital, they're going to affect everyone. So, I think engaging with wider society, civil society, industry, academia, and government, all working together, I think we've got to carry on trying to push towards that.
Great. Well, on that note, we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.